Hello, I'm Maitrimati and I'm based at Therigatha Retreat Centre, and I'm going to be giving a personal talk today for our great gathering on the Therigatha. And I've chosen a poem by a nun called Uttama, and I'll begin by reading her poem. Four or five times I left my cell. I had no peace of mind, no control over mind. I went to a nun I thought I could trust. She taught me the Dharma, the elements of body and mind, the nature of perception and earth, water, fire and wind. I heard what she said and sat cross-legged, 7 days full of joy. When on the 8th I stretched my feet out, the great dark was torn apart. So for some of the nuns of the Therigatha, we have quite a lot of detail about their life, maybe a bit of information about their story, their background, and we don't know very much about Uttama. We know that she came from a banker's family, and we know that she was a disciple of Pantakara, who was one of the foremost teachers in the community of nuns. And what I like about her poem is the description of the moment of enlightenment. She says, "I stretched my feet out, the great dark was torn apart." And there are other descriptions of the moment of enlightenment in the poems of the Therigatha. And so I'm going to talk a bit today about my relationship to the ideal of enlightenment. So how can I understand this great ideal? How can I relate to it? How can I hold it as something that's both beyond and something that I can relate to me, to my life? And in thinking about this, I was remembering a particular retreat at Therigatha where we did an exercise. We all wrote down a description of enlightenment, just in that moment, what we thought it meant to us. And then we also wrote down what we thought it would mean to us in our life. So how we could imagine ourselves as an enlightened being acting in our lives. And I found that exercise very interesting. It still stays with me now, the memory of it, of actually trying to imagine myself as myself with spiritual progress, myself as a being that was further along, what that might look like in terms of my behaviour, in terms of my relationships. And there's also a description in a book by Ajahn Brahm about what an arahant would be like. And he talks about people who have spiritual spikes and how as people practice more, their spiritual spikes wouldn't be as long and they wouldn't hurt other people as much. And that for an arahant, they would have no spikes at all. So there would be somebody that would be really wise, really gentle, someone that would have no anger. So you could just feel really at ease with this person. No sense that you could be harmed in any way, just really at ease with their gentleness, with their wisdom. And I think what I like about that description is how it's relational. So when I'm trying to think about what enlightenment might be like, what an enlightened being would be like, that description talks to me very much in terms of how they would be relating to other people. And Bhante, in Living with Kindness, he makes a comment about the Metta Bhavana where he says, if we perfected the Metta Bhavana, we would no longer feel any sense of threat from anyone. And that's another comment that really struck me, was what it would be like to just have no sense of threat. And it might be that I'm not experiencing a strong sense of threat from other people, but that sense of fear at some level that I can see in a lot of interactions or relationships, just to imagine that that wouldn't be there, that sense of attachment that creates that just wouldn't be there. So that's just a couple of examples that have struck me particularly around insight, around enlightenment. And I'm also quite struck when I meet somebody who very clearly says that they are practicing to gain enlightenment, that they believe enlightenment is possible, they believe it's possible for themselves, and they might be saying, I believe it's possible even in this life. And when I hear that, it's a statement that can both challenge me and also inspire me. And I think the challenge is it really reflects me back on, well, what do I believe? What do I believe is possible for myself in my practice, in my spiritual life? And am I just practicing for something that's a little bit better, a little bit more comfortable? And something I get from thinking about enlightenment, or people saying they think it's possible, some sort of sense of beyond. So some sense that it's not just a little bit further on from where I am now, but there's something much beyond that that is possible. So it feels like something that's very expansive for me in terms of imagining, what might be possible. And I've been ordained for 2 years now, and at ordination I took the meditation practice of the Buddha Shakyamuni. And in the sadhana practice, I imagine the Buddha sat underneath the Bodhi tree, gaining enlightenment. And the Buddha has a beautiful golden aura, and golden light comes from the Buddha, and it streams out throughout the world. And when I do this practice of imagining the Buddha and imagining the Buddha's enlightenment, it sometimes isn't easy to work out how I relate who I am at this moment to that ideal. Sometimes it seems too far away. Sometimes I can't see, almost if I'm feeling in quite unskillful states, quite contracted states of maybe upset, irritability. It can feel like I don't even want to, I don't really know how to do that relationship to such a big ideal. I don't know how to bring myself into relationship with it. And this is a really important area of this practice for me, is how that can happen, however I am in that time that I do that meditation practice, that can still be in relationship to the Buddha, in relationship to enlightenment. And one of the areas where I think it can go wrong in that practice is, or more generally in my spiritual life, is when I have all sorts of ideas about what being spiritual is and all sorts of ideas about what's unspiritual. So to be spiritual, I have ideas that it means being good in some way, being well behaved, being nice, being concerned with other people, and, in some sort of sense, not really having anything that I would need myself in any way. But I would just be able to be completely responsive and open to other people. I would be completely non-reactive, and there's something around emotions of feeling that almost there would be no emotion present. That would be a sort of desirable state, to be able to be this spiritual being who's always responding, who's always concerned with others. And so that relationship, then you can see how that could make it hard in the meditation. Then if I'm not experiencing any of those things, if I'm not able to be spiritual in that way, then how can I bring myself into relationship with what I see as spiritual? And so this can become, I've come up with the term of sort of spiritual straitjacket, where I'm trying to fit myself into some sort of mould, some sort of idea of how things should be for myself as a spiritual practitioner, a spiritual being, which really leaves a lot out, and also can start from a position of not being happy with who I am, from a position of self-hatred, of trying to create this new other being that's just separate from whatever's happening in my experience. So what I'm trying to do with that is I'm trying to really, in my practice, start from where I am, just start from whatever state is happening, whatever reaction, emotion, experience, and work from there, rather than start from this other idea of where I should be. And another part of this is to really allow breadth for myself in my life. So not narrow down and think that spiritual life is about certain spiritual activities like meditation, puja, study, and that anything else like, watching TV, any other activities like going running, doing any of those things, they're sort of okay, but they're not really spiritual. So trying to widen it out to just allow some of those other activities and not feel like things have to be so restricted. So running is something that I do a lot around Tara Loka and really enjoy. And whilst not having to be a spiritual activity, is also something that really helps me in terms of my mental states and working with states that are more difficult. And I've also enjoyed, not so much now, but I also used to really enjoy watching Doctor Who videos and DVDs, and sort of felt a bit shy about that, like that was something that wasn't completely spiritual. And so just allowing these slightly, these other aspects of myself that might not fit into my idea about what being spiritual is completely. So, not trying to narrow things down too much in terms of holding these big ideals, and also not leaving out energy, interest, imagination, passion as a part of that. And another part I like about this poem of Uttama's is the reference to joy in meditation. So she says, after she's talked about hearing the Dharma from Pantakara, she says, "I heard what she said and sat cross-legged 7 days full of joy." And that for me is another reminder about the importance of joy, pleasure in the spiritual life. And I do experience enjoyment in meditation, which just makes it a lot easier to engage with, not feeling like it's something I should do as a Buddhist, not feeling like it's a chore, but really enjoying the states that can, not always, but can sometimes open up in meditation. So allowing that sort of enjoyment, allowing a breadth in my life, and allowing things that do stimulate imagination and interest. So in conclusion, I do find enlightenment an inspiring ideal. I do find it helpful to bring to mind something that's beyond me, that I'm practicing for not just the next step sometimes, or the next week, the next year, but something that's just completely beyond that, something that's much higher. And that can help to make me feel inspired to get energy and engagement in my practice. But also trying to remember in approaching this ideal not to come from a sense of self-hatred, of not being okay as I am. So I've got to try and realise this, almost create this other person as a response to that. So trying to relate to spiritual ideals from a sense of inspiration, from a sense of joy, from a sense of being drawn towards more expansive states of contentment, joy, and away from more contracted states of fear, of anger, of craving. And I do find it inspiring to read the poems of the Therigatha, of these nuns who were practicing, and in their practice they talk about these experiences of realization, of attainment, and in some sense that does give me a belief that something more is possible for me. So I'll just finish by reading Uttama's verse again. "4 or 5 times I left my cell. I had no peace of mind, no control over mind. I went to a nun I thought I could trust. She taught me the Dharma, the elements of body and mind, the nature of perception, and earth, water, fire, and wind. I heard what she said and sat cross-legged, 7 days full of joy. When on the 8th I stretched my feet out, the great dark was torn apart. Thank you.